friends. Welcome to the Normalizing Average podcast. Join us as we dive into the stories behind the people who have overcome setbacks to achieve success, celebrating the average moments on the path to extraordinary results. Let's go.
Okay, welcome, guys. This is Normalizing Average. I am your host, Eve Duke, and on the podcast today we have Chris Rubens, and I'm going to hit you with his intro. Chris has been a globally recognized skier for the last 20 years. Dedicated and extremely passionate about skiing the mountains. He spends as much time as possible in the backcountry every winter, specializing in putting beautiful lines down on mountain for both film and photo projects. He spends most of his winters collaborating with Salomon Freeski and Sherpas cinema. And between ski trips, Chris resides in Revelstoke, British Columbia, which provides a backyard of endless opportunities for outdoor pursuits. Chris, thank you for coming on the show.
I think that's it. Is that a wrap?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That sums up everything you need to know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on. You were one of the few people who I'm able to just Google, and Google has, like, I don't need to Google Chris Rubens skier, Chris Rubens Salomon. It's just Chris Rubens. The internet knows who you are.
Well, I guess maybe like my name's spelled differently than the sandwich, so it's like somewhat unique, but I feel like there's another Chris Rubens artist out there somewhere, but maybe it's not as
like on page
popular.
Google search page 7. Like, the poor guy doesn't have a chance.
Yeah, no, it's fair to say that I'm fairly active on the old World Wide Web.
As you would need to be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely turned into that for sure.
All right, well, let's talk about your career and how you got there. And if you want to add anything to your bio or anything that we missed in there, you could let us know where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, the bio definitely like sums up the general gist of it. But yeah, I'll be going into basically my like 20th year as a professional skier next year, which is completely insane. That's about 15 years longer than I ever expected it to be. Well, to be fair, it's about 20 years longer than I ever expected it to be, and then it seems to keep going. But yeah, I mean, I got my start. I was a ski racer. And that's just because I kind of have a very funny like upbringing. My parents are both British, and then my sister and I were actually born in Australia, and then we moved to Calgary when I was 5.5.
No way.
My dad had a job in the oil business, and he had a job opportunity, and they always wanted to move to the mountains, and not that Calgary's in the mountains, but the mountains are right there. And then so we moved, and then immediately got into skiing. And I think they found this like ski racing program called Nancy Green, which we all know at the time or now, but we knew nothing about it. And they're like, wait, you're going to take our kids for the weekend and we can go skiing? Like, this is amazing. Like there was no like, oh, I want my kids to be a World Cup ski racer or whatever. And so that was with the Sunshine Village Ski Club, which was like a very non-competitive, like fun club. And I mean, skiing was very different back then. Like didn't take ski racing very seriously. We were like super excited to actually ski gates, because most of the time we were just like free skiing around the mountains. But ended up being pretty decent at ski racing, and I guess it's kind of like anything I do, I get super into it. So went down the competitive path of ski racing till I was about 16 years old, basically grade 11, and then kind of had this like turning point where I was supposed to go. I was supposed to get on the provincial team, and due to whatever reason, they didn't name me to the team, and so I kind of had an option to like keep skiing for another year, ski racing for another year, or and that would have been my grade 12 year, and I would have had to do it in 2 years. Like, ski racing was so intense at the time, and I kind of just hated school, and my parents wanted me to do good in school, and so I decided not to like keep ski racing and buckle down for a year, get good grades. And I joined the Rocky Mountain Freeriders, which was run by Guy Mowbray, who now lives in Revelstoke as well, which was like the first kind of freeride team at the time. Eric Horlifson was a coach. I joined it with his brother Stevie, and then Kevin Yurtis was one of the coaches as well. And those are kind of like that's like kind of the mentor crew that I grew up with. Eric was like well on his path to being a pro skier. To be honest, I wasn't thinking about being a pro skier at all. At really any given point, I kind of just never thought I was like good enough. But then you just kind of ended up pursuing these opportunities, and all of a sudden it's 20 years later. But yeah, it was a super fun kind of way to do things. So that year, got good grades, said peace to high school, was not my thing. And
your final year of high school, so you just had to make it through that.
Yeah, exactly. I still, it's like one of my like strongest memories is leaving like the last exam of high school, just being like, I'm never coming back to this. It wasn't for me. And then worked that summer, and then moved out to Canmore. And that was kind of like the beginning of the end. Did a year with the RMF, and then by the next year I was coaching it. And then I guess it's like when you come back to this the start of being a pro skier, is it was so different back then. Everything was new. So like Rocky Mountain Freeriders, it was like, I mean, I joined it maybe 3 years in. It was like the first free ride team of its type, and there was no other competitors or anything like that. And then at the same time, this free ride store in Calgary opened up named Fresh. And I walked in there when I was like 18, was like, hey man, will you sponsor me? And he was like, well, yeah, send me your resume and blah, blah, blah. And like got a good like schooling in how to like present myself from him. And he was kind of, his name is Steve Sarenchuk, and still owns Fresh today. And he was like kind of one of our biggest like business cheerleaders. He knew the industry. He hooked me up with all my first sponsors, which I mean, Salomon, that continues to this day. So big thanks to him. And he just kind of like just helped us put a name to skiing in Western Canada. At that time, there was definitely like a scene in the Bow Valley, but the epicenter of the world was Whistler. So that's like really where the scene was. So yeah, like over the years, had different film projects and different opportunities, and they kept getting better. And I ended up spending a lot of time in Whistler. It was kind of like expected. And then after about 4 years of living in Canmore, I'd made the move to Revelstoke, and that was the year before the resort was announced or anything like that. So, and it was kind of just like this backcountry mecca, but it was closer to Whistler too. And I wasn't like ready to move to Whistler. But yeah, that's kind of like a jumble of stories in there. But then as
like
far as
the
like
one person who wasn't drawn to get right into the Whistler scene.
well, I mean, it's funny. It's like the Rockies. I mean, they still have it. It's like you're like bred to hate Whistler. It's like this thing, and like Eric ended up like we were spending. He was like, I mean, he's my best friend, and we kind of had blossoming ski careers at the same time. So we spent a lot of time filming together, and he ended up moving to Whistler, and I moved to Revy. And yeah, it's just kind of funny. You like hate on these places, but now, I mean, Whistler's like a second home to me to some degree. I have tons of friends there, and you go there and you just do the exact same things as you do in Revelstoke. Like you go to potlucks, you like avoid downtown, like that sort of thing. You know, it's like you don't go to like the crazy tourist side of things, which I thought was pretty funny. It was like a good learnable there. But yeah, like, yeah, so kind of jumped into the scene, like working construction or landscaping all summer, and that paid for being a professional skier. Like, yeah, I say like 20 years of being a professional skier, but realistically, it's like probably only like 8 maybe. That's like actually like
only be able to or only need to ski.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like, yeah, and it just kind of snowballed. Like the first year was like, here kid, here's a pair of skis, like go get them, like, and you're like, cool, like this is awesome. And then shooting photos and video parts were coming up, and just kept kind of pursuing it. And then at some point there, I got like a break through Eric with the Matchstick guys. And I guess that was kind of like my big break into like the more mainstream side of things. And it was a pretty.
Was that your first video part?
Yeah, first like big video part. There was I used to film with Theory 3, which is an older company, and I still work with the director camera guy to this day. He was with Salomon Freeski TV, and now he does the Blank Collective there. Yeah, it's funny how like long a bunch of us have been in there, it's been a long time. But yeah, that the Matchstick thing was definitely like where like things started to change and get recognized. And it was probably like one of the more challenging years of my life. Like we bought snowmobiles in Revelstoke, like mine like instantly blew up, and it was like the classic, like I hear people's sled stories now and I'm like, you guys have no idea, like the old sleds were so crappy, like what we used to
heavy.
Oh, so heavy, they'd get stuck. They're so unreliable. Like, I mean, they're still unreliable, but compared to what they are now, it's like, yeah, it's crazy.
Well,
But yeah,
you used to get so much less mileage out of them that you do out of a new sled now. Like a sled would last,
totally.
I think Scott we'd cap ours at like what, 8,000 hours or something like that. Maybe even less. Then it's over. Like it's like that sled's not good anymore.
Yeah, totally. It's such a crazy thing. And like, I mean, the irony in all of it is like, I mean, the first sled was like a terrible investment. It just blew up and was like a total lemon. But then the next year I bought like a newer sled at the time, or a new sled at the time. And that's probably like ironically like one of the best investments I've ever made, because as far as like filmmaking goes, it's just really easy to do when you're in the backcountry with a snowmobile. It's just like the access to lines, like not having to like rush people. Like if you're at the ski hill and you're trying to film, it's just like you're rushing to lines, and someone always like skis across it and kind of ruins the shot or whatever. So that's kind of like was like a really good investment. And at the time, like if you were filming for Matchstick, you were like really they were like very intensive on heli trips, but you're spending like $10,000 or $15,000 on a heli trip for 2 weeks. It's like pretty stressful. And then so luckily, you'd get one of those a year, and then the rest of the time you'd be on your snowmobile like filming. But I mean that it's changed. I mean, I reminisce about that all the time. Like, so back in this era, I mean, this is like 07, 08, kind of in that range. And this is before social media, or just like maybe the start of social media. And you were just kind of expected to like film all year for this one like 5-minute video part. And was your job. It was like crazy. And you would spend like, I mean, you'd have hours of footage that just hit the floor.
Yeah.
It was like the best of the best. Whereas now it's like, I mean, I've filmed parts in like 2 days now. You're like, hey, we're coming into town. Like, this is what we have. And you're like, well, we'll go see what you get. And sometimes you get lucky and it works out. But yeah, it's like, it's just, yeah, the whole thing's like really changed. And now it's like you go out and film a segment and you're like posting about it on social media and you're like sharing it, and yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's so crazy to think about. Just as you were talking about that, what I'm thinking of is the investment, like the actual dollar investment that would go into one of those original Matchstick movies. From, if you looked at not just the filmers, the directors, like the company, but also every rider who's like the gas, like, and just the snowmobiles and the tools and just and the time. It's so crazy. And
Yeah,
then
totally.
and you guys wouldn't be getting paid for it, would you? Like, you get paid for movies back then? I feel like
No,
that's
I mean,
labor of love. That's like part of the job, right?
No, I mean, we still don't really. I mean, I think it's like one of the things that people don't really understand. It's like, so basically how it works for the most part is like a film company will go out and get a sponsor, and then that sponsor will be like, okay, well, you need to film our athletes. And so the sponsor will give the film company money to make the movie, and then they give the athlete like a little bit of pay and maybe some travel budget to like go towards their portion of the movie. But for the most part, I mean, it's a classic small business example of like, if you ever to like put an hourly wage on it, it would be like pretty horrible. Yeah, and you definitely like, I mean, that's the one big thing I see nowadays is like the youth coming up, they're kind of like expecting to be making a bunch of money like right off the bat. And it's like, unless you're like the next like Jordan of skiing, that's probably not going to happen. It's like a slow grind. And I mean, it took me years to make like a decent living at it. And then you're like, yeah, you and then there's just so many different aspects of it. It's not just like going out and riding the gnarliest line. It's like being like writing emails back, like talking about product, yeah, like all sorts of stuff, and creating but yeah, it's very much a labor of love, that stuff for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of like even up and coming athletes, maybe they realize it now, but even when I was in the industry, they didn't realize that you're a brand ambassador too. That's a big part of the job, is like actually marketing and representing the brand in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think that's like the biggest thing is like you have to recognize that you're dealing with like I mean, you can work for a smaller company, but you might be working for like a multi-million-dollar brand. It's like you need to prove value to that brand, and how you do that, like it's different for everybody. And I think that's like the important part of like staying true to yourself, is like you're like, what do I have to offer, and then align the brands with what your strengths are. I think is like probably like a really good way to go about that. And then like always like dancing in between the lines, you know, I hear it less now, but I remember back in the day it was all about like selling out and stuff like that, and you're like, okay, whatever that means. I'm still a bit confused as to what like selling out means. It's like I get to ski for a living, and it's a job. Like treat it like a job, like, and not in a bad sense of like that, but like show up perfect, like how you would expect to be paid for, which is like generally it's professional. It's yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I see in the later years of professionalism, is like when I show up, and increasingly like it'll be into like paid gigs. Like if you get into like advertisements or something like that, it's like okay, like you're getting paid a decent amount of money. It's like I'm showing up and I'm like ready to go. Like I'm there on time. I've got like all my gear together. I can like read snow conditions. I can, you know, like if we're dealing with avalanche terrain, I'm like well trained in that. And so I very much look at it as like the professional part of professional skiing, as you would in any other job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever see guys who are like almost like weeded out or lose opportunity and lose sponsorship opportunities because they don't treat it that way?
Totally. Yeah, I think so. I think it's like I mean, for me, that's definitely why I've kept my career for so long, I would say, is like I've treated it like professionally, and then just always like kind of had that in my back pocket of like thinking about proving my value to the company. I mean, there's a pro photographer that I shot with lots over the years, Blake Jorgensen, takes amazing photos, and he always said to me is like, kind of treat it like it's always going to end, you know, like, and then you like, one, you're going to be hungry for it. Two, you think like, how can I do better? And three, you just enjoy it. because it's like this crazy thing, you know. I know my parents thought I was crazy when I was starting off on a pro skier journey, and I never thought I could be around this long, but here we are 20 years later, and it's like it's had this like incredible amount of experiences, opportunities, and also made a living doing it, which is super cool. It's like I like that aspect of like doing something a little bit different that is a little out of the norm.
Yeah.
But all at the same time, I think it's like really important for people to like look ahead, especially for action sports. I think is like one thing that I see is like the youth is like I've been like fairly lucky when it comes to injuries. I mean, at this point, there's an element of being smart about it too. But you know, like you can get injured and you can get surgery and you can get back on your feet, but 20 years down the road, that injury is going to come back, and like arthritis or like anything. So just like, I think that's like really important to think about it, and none of that's worth it. I mean, there's definitely days out there when it's like, all right, like it is perfect right now, and like I am willing to go send it. And if I hurt myself, like I knew that it was like the best possible day. And that's kind of how I've always looked at it, is like, and those are like maybe 3 or 4 days a year, maybe, and that's going out almost every single day to get those days. You know, and then to me, I'm like, okay, if I like hurt myself or even worse, die today, it's an acceptable risk. Whereas like if it's like kind of sketchy out, or like hard pack, or the snow conditions suck and you're pushing it and you hurt yourself and you're like, that was really stupid, and you're like, yeah, that's right, it was stupid.
That wasn't the day.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's like something super important for people to realize. And like I've done a lot of like camps with Kapow guiding there, and like just talking at like avalanche seminars and stuff at the beginning of the year. And that's like kind of always been my like one of my strengths is like, okay, these are the conditions, like I'm not going to jump a cliff today because it's like really not good, but what can I do? So and there's always something you can do, like let's go out and shoot one turn wonders, or let's go and like try and like do some hiking shots or something like that. And that's the important part, because when you go on a trip or something, sponsors are paying a bunch of money, there's filmmakers there, like it's costing you money. So it's like regardless of what the conditions are, you want to come back with something, but not at the risk of hurting yourself. So finding that line of like, I mean, that's the beauty about living in a place like Revelstoke, is like you have all these beautiful vistas. So it's like, okay, it's like crappy out, like let's just go hike a ridge and we can get some shots there or whatever. So it's just kind of like being creative like that, I think.
Well, and that's going to be something I would imagine where your experience is invaluable, where you can go on those trips, you know, you have in the back of your mind like how much this is costing the company and everybody, just in time and actual dollars. And then you also know that you would have like kind of in the bank, in the back of your mind, like all these other things that you can do, shots that you know that you can get, that maybe somebody who's new to filming doesn't really think about. They're like, oh, well, the day sucks, or it's like a really crappy weather day, so I guess we just can't get anything. Whereas you would know that, oh, hey, there's all these other things that we can do, or also knowing the terrain, that there's all this other terrain that maybe we could go check out.
Yeah, no, totally. That's like, yeah, I mean, I realize that more and more. It's like a lot of that comes with experience for sure. But we've had, there's just so many people that have been in it for a really long time, like even like that I looked up to, and to me that like that's how I learned. I didn't do like a lot of like formal courses. It was like finding an experienced person and like latching on and seeing how they did it, and like that's kind of generally how I learn, is kind of like throwing myself in there and and learning it that way.
Yeah.
But most of those people, like myself included, it's like I would love to like mentor people and like help them out and try and figure out how to do it better, because
Mhm.
it's not like there is like an element of experience to it.
Mhm. Do you think it's easier? It was easier back then, back in the day, 20 years ago, or now to like be a pro skier, to
I
like
mean,
really break through?
it's so hard. I mean, it's so hard to answer that question, but I I don't think I would be a pro skier today if I was coming up.
Mhm.
Because I never like I didn't necessarily have the drive to do it. It was just like I love skiing and someone gave me a pair of skis and I chose to like embrace these opportunities, and I was like really stoked to do it, but I wasn't like I was just living it. I
Mhm.
wasn't like I didn't have this like set goal of like trying to do this and this, which is like also like kind of very much how I live my life, kind of by the seat of my pants. But it's just kind of like what works for me. It's like if I'm feeling it, it's like it's working.
Yeah.
But like yeah, I mean now today, I mean so like there's two sides of it. So um when I started to like get into matchstick, they were using 16 millimeter film camera, which sounds so old, and I'm not even that old. But we were shooting on film, and it was like I can't remember what the costs were, but it was like significant amount of money when that film camera came out. That you did not want to screw up the shot. Like if you screwed
Mhm.
up the shot, that was like money that was just gone. Whereas
Yeah.
today with like digital, it's like did it really cost any money? Like not really. Like
Mhm.
you could just delete it if you wanted to. Um, but so these cameras were super expensive. You need to know how to run it. You needed to buy the film. Like it was like a pretty high cost of entry. Whereas now it's like with a GoPro and like a iPhone, and like the kids know how to use computers and edit it all and make it look cool.
Mhm.
You can make these like really high quality videos,
Mhm.
and you don't need that. So the opportunity is there. I would say that the hard part now is there's so much noise out there because there's so many people creating these things that um, it's hard to stand out.
Yeah.
I think is like the hardest thing.
Mhm.
But that being said, it's like the people, um, like the people I see come into the industry, um, the ones that don't make it, more often than not there's a reason, and then the ones that stick around there's a reason too, and they're providing value, and um they're like yes people a lot, they're like just stoked and like yeah, I'll do that, I'll try this, like just like have this like happy go lucky and working hard, and generally speaking they act as professionals,
Yeah.
and they treat it as a job, and they work really hard at it, and are really good at it. So yeah, I mean skiing's like kind of one of those interesting things, or just doing anything that you love is always a bit more challenging. Like I've run um like a carpentry company for a while, and my heart wasn't in it. Like I did great job, but it was much easier to make business decisions because my heart wasn't it.
Yeah.
Like I enjoyed it, but it was like I could very much look at it as like a black and white issue. I'm like, well, I'm not getting paid enough, I'm not going to do that job. Like
Mhm.
whereas like skiing, you're like, well, if I do that for cheap, then maybe it's like a good investment in my future for this, and like you can justify it all these different ways, because like
Yeah.
ultimately all you want to do is ski. um and that's like another point, is like the generally speaking, the people that I know that made it as professionals love skiing. Like that is like what they're about. Like they have,
Mhm.
um, yeah, that's their gig. They love skiing more than anything. Like, I mean, one of the craziest pro skiers is Tanner Hall, and he's like legitimately has a bit of crazy in him, but he like loves skiing more than anyone I've ever met. Like it's crazy, and it's so
Mhm.
rad, and it's super inspiring. Um, so yeah, I find like that side of it like interesting, and really important. I mean, I yeah, I'm in it for, this will be my 20th year. And it definitely has become a job. So recently, like probably in the last like 4 or 5 years, I really wanted to find like a different income, to like be able to like look at skiing with like a fresh light of like not just my paycheck, of like how I pay my mortgage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And nor like I'm 38 now. I don't want to get like pushed and screaming out the door. I'd like to end it on good terms and like how I want to do it. And so my partner and I started a farm in Revelstoke, and last year, or like last summer, it was like, okay, there's like money to be made in this farm, but it gave me the opportunity to like take a look at skiing this past winter and being like, what do I really want to do with it, without the monetary side of it. And it made me realize that I just like, I actually really love being a pro skier. Like I like the filming aspect of it. I also just had a kid, so it made me like examine my risk tolerance, which was super interesting. But it was funny because it's like, I found out I was having a kid, and was like exploring like what pro skiing meant to me this winter, and kind of what I've realized is like my risk tolerance, mainly from poor experiences, has just been going down and down and down. And I've just kind of found this like manageable level of where I'm happy with it. There's always going to be risk, but I just like, I really enjoy making films, and I really enjoy the creative aspect of it, of like putting together a trip that works out really well. And then I really enjoy, so like when you go skiing with your friends, it's like, if you're touring or at the hill, you're like, I'm going to hit that cliff next time or whatever. And you never look at it close enough. And then you always get to the top and you're like, I don't really remember what this looks like. And you're always like, go slowly to the edge. And then you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. I knew it was fine. I should have just like skied into it, Whereas when you're film skiing, it's like, you get to the bottom, like everyone kind of like starts looking around at the zone and picks out their line. And you have like binoculars out, you have your camera taking photos and like really studying these lines, because if you stop in the middle of it, that will never make the movie. So it's just this like amazing opportunity to like really hone in these different lines that you just don't do normally. It's like you don't put in that time. So that's like kind of what I realized is like, that's the kind of skiing that like I really, really have fun on. Because when you like do your homework and the snow conditions are right, it's pretty easy. Like it's I mean, of course there's like, you're scared and you're dealing with like fear, because if it's not that scary, it probably won't make the movie. But like that's like a whole different element. It's like really putting your like time in and like focusing on this like big long like mini project, and then executing, and then doing that a couple times a day, and then it like you do that and you get all the pieces, and all of a sudden you have like a bigger project. So I like kind of realized that I like really enjoy that aspect of the professional skiing side of things.
On the like talking about just loving skiing and loving what you do you think that you would feel the same way if you were, because there's like, I just want to talk for a minute about free skiing versus like say competition skiing, which I know for the snowboard industry it's similar. It's like you kind of have these two paths and two options as an athlete, or you could do both, but you tend to like kind of gravitate towards one or the other. Do you think not having the same amount of pressure to compete keeps you almost like more engaged and keeps it fun, I guess, is almost what I'm getting at, is like the fun aspect is there versus the like turning it into a job where it's you have to like go to a certain amount of competitions, get points, etc.
I mean, I feel like the people that like are into the you're either good at competing or you're not. There's like not really, I mean, I guess I was like a bit of an in-between, but like, I mean, back as far as ski racing go, I was the guy that like, you know, you'd film or you'd time training runs and you'd be like near the top, and then on race day I would blow up, and the guys that were blowing up in training would like excel, you know, like the people that are really good at competing are like, they excel under those conditions. So I think they love it. I mean, if you're doing well at competing, they're like, what's not to love there?
That's what drives them. It's like a different mindset, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it like, it's very like tangible, like especially like in the like the free ride world tour or something like that. In skiing, it's like they've controlled the slope. You're not making avalanche decisions. You're kind of just like, this is my arena and I'm going to try and do like the most badass line possible today. And I think that's kind of like how you have to look at it. But increasingly, like those competitions, like when it's good, a lot of those lines would be an amazing film line too. Like it used to be like they kind of zigzagged across the mountain a bit more. Yeah, I mean, I certainly like did a fair amount of competing at the start. It was just kind of like the way that you went, but I'm pretty thankful I got into the film side of it. To me, it's more just like the conditions. It's like a conditions thing, like going back to like hurting yourself, like the conditions those guys throw down on in comps. I'm like, oh, like it's so crazy to me. It's so high consequence. And yeah, I mean, ultimately I love skiing powder. It's like that's my favorite thing in the world is skiing powder, and my second favorite thing in the world is skiing like deep powder in the trees with pillows. And that's probably why I live in Revelstoke.
Number one, powder. Number two, deep powder.
Yeah, totally. It just, to me, it's like it's like floating down the mountain. It's the closest thing to flying, and like the terrain in Revelstoke is so conducive to it. You know, you're skiing down in these trees, and like for sure there can be times when it's dangerous in the trees, but sometimes it's like there's no avalanche condition like danger, and your brain is off on that side of it. You are just like purely focusing on skiing down this mountain in the most fun way possible, and that's like, you get to the bottom and you're just like hysterically laughing. Like it's like, what else do you do that? I don't do that on a bike. I don't do that in anything else. Like the hysterical laughing of like, how could you possibly have that much fun? And like that hasn't lost its effect on me at all.
No, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
And I like, I mean, it's like we're all so like, it's like you ski in the winter and you mountain bike in the summer, and the thing about mountain biking is you never like come back from a day of mountain biking. He's like, oh well, how was your day? It's like, oh, I fell a couple times. It's like you say that after a ski day or a snowboard day like all the time, and it's totally fine. But if you say that on a bike day, it's like you're probably in the hospital. Like it has like a sharper consequence to some degree.
You have a lot less, like talking about that risk tolerance too. In those days, it's a lot more forgiving.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, and then I mean, back to like the risk tolerance, I find that's kind of like how I like align myself with people in the mountains, and it just kind of happens naturally. I find it's like you end up with like going out with people that your risk tolerance is really aligned with. Like I mentioned earlier, I was like really fortunate to grow up with a good group of guys, the Horlifsons and Kevin Yurtis, and like, I mean, I can still go out in the mountains to this day with them, and like we barely need to talk about anything. It's just like we're so similarly aligned. And I mean, that's the cool part about mountains is you end up with these friendships that like really are super, super strong. for that reason, because you're like, your life often depends on it.
Yeah.
And their life depends on you, so it's like it creates these like crazy tight bonds, which is super fun and like super meaningful.
And you've probably, like, after spending years growing up in the mountains too, even together, you've been through some shit and been through some stuff to get like together, which forms further bonds you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it's like, you definitely, by the time you get to a decent age, if you spent some time in the mountains, you've seen your fair share of stuff, and that kind of like adds to where your like risk tolerance is, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So speaking of which, it's a good segue to not 2021, but was it 2020 winter? Or maybe, no, maybe it was early 2021, where your buddy was caught in an avalanche and you had a super quick rescue, which was amazing. I watched that video, so I'll put the link on onto this as well if anybody wants to check it out. This is pretty cool, and also a pretty good example of how to deal and how to handle an avalanche situation. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, that was yeah. I mean that's the, I mean, I've had lots of close calls over the year, but that was like the first time that I've actually like had to take my beacon out and like search for somebody. And it just so happened,
kind of blows my mind, because I
yeah,
figured
I
this
mean,
would have been like the 10th time for you.
no, I mean that's the thing. It's like I've definitely gone for a few rides myself, but always like come out on top or like fought my way out of them. Eric and myself had a really close call in the fresh fields a number of years ago, but we ended up on top as well. But generally speaking, like, yeah, like not like close calls, but all also like fairly removed from it. Whereas this was like definitely like the most, by far the most real that I've been a part of. So we were filming for this Forecast magazine Toyota shoot where is my buddy Noah Morrison, and he is from Vernon, and then I was obviously from Revelstoke, and the idea was like I would show him my backyard, and then he would show me his backyard, and he's a gibber. He's like X Games, like the whole 9 yards. So he had basically no backcountry experience. So I was kind of making the decisions that day, and it was like one of those days where I knew it was early season, knew we were pushing it a bit, but we like eased into that day. We'd skied a bunch of things already and watched people ski a bunch of things, and it seemed like things were like pretty glued in. And so I like definitely teed him up on that line. Unfortunately, like he skied down, aired the cliff, and he would have been totally fine, but he punch fronted on the landing and started tumbling. And then as he started tumbling, his slough came behind, landed off the cliff, and released a slab. But yeah, so that was like the first time that I've like gone into full rescue mode. I practice a lot every year, obviously, because it all felt like, it's like the classic, like if you hear like a doctor, it's like you just like, if you practice a lot, you stop thinking, basically. You're just reacting. You're just like kind of doing what you train for. I guess like one of my big takeaways was like how many thoughts you can go through in such a quick time. Like you're thinking about exactly what you need to do, but you're also thinking about like he was like a newborn dad or like a new father, had a wife, and I was just like, I mean that's what I was thinking of. It's like, this can't happen. Like this is not happening right now.
Yeah. It's
But at the
encouraging
same,
to hear that was like just that the almost like the muscle memories there, the knowledge of what to do is there from practice. Because I'm always afraid that until you do it and you're in the situation, that it's like, I'm like, oh, what if my mind just like goes blank? And the practice doesn't matter because you haven't actually been in the situation and all these other factors come into play. So it's actually really encouraging for me to know that it's like, okay, if you practice it enough and you go over it and maybe run through the scenarios, then that will kick in.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I had this, and you don't know until you have it. Like, I didn't
Mhm.
know how I was going to react. I always had that deep down fear of like, what happened? Like, am I going to do it properly? Am I going to do that? But um it's like, I mean, there's all the talk of flow state these days, and that was like the definition of flow state for sure.
Mhm.
You're like hyper aware, doing things without even thinking about them.
Mhm.
And that comes from, I mean, like I say, I practice every year, but like really practice like setting up proper scenarios that are like as realistic as possible. And like ideally, like after being in that situation and like being a part of scenarios, as like those scenarios should get your heart rate elevated. You should be feeling those feels. That's how you know that you're practicing properly.
Yeah.
And then it's not that much different. I mean, you kind of like, it's like the classic um thing I find, I guess, as you get older, you just kind of have to remove the emotion side of it. Like not let those like take over, because that doesn't really help anything ever.
Mhm.
um and especially in this situation, it's like very like, okay, I know how to do this, like let's execute.
Yeah. Oh, and
um
you're so on it too, which, and even just talking about that, that's in the practice, that makes sense. That because I was like, yeah, just on a stats, on a numbers game alone, like 20 years, this must have been a situation that you've been in. But it's actually makes more sense that it wouldn't have been a situation that you've been in because you know what you're doing.
yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, that's the point. And like for sure there's luck involved for sure. There's
Hmm.
no doubt about that. But um I mean, that's my like whenever we're doing like safety courses or whatever, that's like normally one of the first things we talk about is like how little incidences we've been in.
Yeah.
But for sure we've been lucky over the years. But yeah, I mean, I think that's also like one of the elements of like why I love being a pro skier is like we had so many different angles on that day, because we were filming, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden we have this like awesome education piece that we can share with people. And the forecast guys were like stoked to put it together and did a really good job on the edit. And I I think that's like a super valuable thing to like have out there.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, it's not that often that you can that you really can watch like a full avalanche experience and rescue successfully. Um, like just from multiple angles too. Like it was terrifying watching. It was Ryan watching his head cam because then you're under it and you can hear it and you can hear him like kind of gulping and swallowing snow and just like, okay, this is crazy. And then watching your camera as you go down, choose your line to get down to him and do the rescue. So it's pretty, yeah, it's pretty cool.
yeah, and I do think it's like really, really important for people to understand like the consequences of backcountry skiing.
Hmm.
Um, is like it's like something that I've come to terms with. There is a risk to it. I personally have like fine-tuned my risk tolerance to like where I'm personally comfortable with it. It's not going to be the same as your risk tolerance,
Hmm.
um, or like anybody else's for that matter. But it is like really important to understand like the real consequences of that. Um, yeah, we I was saying we just had a kid, and yeah, if you were somehow in a birthing room when you were younger, you probably take safe sex like a lot more seriously. Like, like seeing the actual consequences of that. Like
Yeah.
both my partner and I said that at the end, just like holy cow, like that was, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, this is the best education you could give somebody is like, here's the end result. And
Totally.
like,
And like it's like I felt like I knew it, but like and I did, and I like,
mhm.
but if you like ever were experiencing that, you'd be like, holy cow, like I need to be like really, yeah, I don't know but I would have been a lot more scared for sure.
It's
But
really gnarly. Yeah.
yeah, but it's like, yeah, it's the same. I mean, the same for backcountry skiing and just, I mean, skiing in general. It's like that's like classic. Like it can give you the highest of highs and the lowest of lows,
Mm.
which ultimately is what makes it so amazing. I mean, you can't have the highs without the lows, but the lows can be pretty low. Like
Yeah.
they're pretty crappy and they're real, and people's lives get affected from it, and that's a hard thing to deal with. And if you're going to spend a bunch of time in the mountains, you'll deal with them to some degree. So yeah.
Let's talk about fear. Like, how much does fear come into what you do for you specifically, because you do so much stuff that's really gnarly? So is it just like the fear just gets pushed, like the more you do, you become more competent, and then the fear just goes away with certain stuff, like certain size cliffs? Or I don't know, how do you deal with that, or how has that changed and throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an element of that. Like you get more comfortable. The more time you spend in gnarly terrain, the more comfortable you get with it.
Mm.
And there's like a confirmation bias that there's like an element of that to it for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There was a guy that interviewed a bunch of pro skiers last year, myself included, about fear. And I think he was expecting everyone to be kind of like adrenaline junkies. And I was kind of towards the end of, like, he had already interviewed a bunch, and basically like his finding was like that we all don't particularly like fear. Like I don't, yeah, like I certainly, like, if my adrenaline's going, like I screwed something up probably to some degree. It's like that was like too loose for like my personal gain. Like for sure at the bottom you have like a rush going, which I suppose is adrenaline, but like yeah, like some of the times it's just like not what you're looking for, because that means you weren't calculated. I guess I kind of look at it, there's like a difference between fear and being scared, in the sense of like if you are scared, there's maybe something wrong going on. So like something about your line or something about the snow conditions that you're like sensing that's like not quite there. And ultimately it's just an experience thing of like feeling out that like, am I scared or do I have fear?
Yeah.
Because if you have fear, it's like you're pushing yourself. That's like part of the fun of it, is like you want to push yourself, you want to do something better than you've done before. That's like a human instinct, but you don't want to be dangerous about it. So you're like trying to control as many variables as possible. Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of it's the process. Like a lot of times we'll go on a film trip that's 2 weeks long, and you really start slow. For the most part, I mean, sometimes you walk in and it's perfect right off the bat, but even then you're going to start slow and like ramp yourself up. And normally like the biggest, craziest lines happen towards the end, after you've like slowly worked into them and you're like really feeling comfortable with snow conditions. Like you've been staring at particular line for a week, maybe a couple days, like really just like, it's like you go on these film trips and we like take thousands of photos, and then you're sitting in a hotel or in a tent afterwards, and everyone's like on their phones, like looking at lines, depicting them, and like you have these like fantasy lines, and sometimes they go down because the conditions are just like right, and you really work your head frame, your head space up into that moment. But yeah, I mean, that's the challenge. It's like a lot of the times you'll be standing on top of a line, and inevitably you're waiting for light or a filmer or something like that, and inevitably it's always on the scariest ones, and you're like, why am I doing this? Like, this is so dumb. But I guess it's also like fun to like put yourself in that situation and try and get through it safely. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of times that you know, you'll give yourself options at the bottom. You'll like look up and be like, okay, I'm gonna like look at that from the top. I've really like predominantly most of my filming done ski touring now, and for the reason that I can like really scope things on the way up, like really have like a really good foot on it, and it's a slower process, whereas like back in the day we did a lot more filming out of helicopters and it was like this really fast process. And you can get good eyes on, but like not quite as good, and I just didn't enjoy the fast pace of it. I like the slow burn of it. Is like, you know, it might take you an hour to get to the top of the line and you're just thinking about the line the whole way up the hike and like dissecting every little part of it and trying to get different angles on it. And so it's like when you actually like nail one of those big lines from hiking it, it's like you're like hours deep of being in it. So the reward is like super fulfilling. Which is the part that I like, and it lasts for a really long time. Whereas like this filming out of helicopters, you might go ski the gnarliest line you've ever skied, and then 5 minutes you're at the bottom and you're like shaking and you're like, holy cow, that was crazy. And then someone's like, okay, what's next? And you're like, you know,
get back up there.
Yeah, and it is, and you just like, which is like totally fine, and I just you don't get to like experience that moment for as long. And that's like, to me, that those are the moments, like that's the feeling that we're looking for. It's like you're like totally content. You're like, and it doesn't last long enough, but you're like totally content. You like nailed your line. I mean, the flip side of that is when you screw up a film, like most film skiers, when they screw up a film line, they're pretty like hard on themselves about it, for sure. It's like, because you get that one chance, and most shots, like, you know, a big day of filming, you're like maybe getting 4 or 5 lines in, so every one of them counts. Yeah.
And then how often this is more like just an industry tech question, how often do they want, I guess ideally the line is like completely clean, so once it's like already been ridden, even like let's say you have 1 or 2 clean runs on there, do they even want to shoot that again, or is it like, no, we got to move on to a zone where it's like another super fresh zone?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends. I mean, filmmakers are pretty good at like cropping out shots and like shooting it differently and stuff like that, but for the most part, there's like, I feel like the snowboarders do it more, where they like go in and session stuff for a while and there's tracks everywhere. But for whatever skiing, it's like it's definitely like, at some point there's like too many tracks, for sure.
It loses like the allure of the mountains, where you're like, okay, well, these guys, it's like looks like a ski run now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's definitely like an element of that's like when it's the most fun too, when it's like a total fresh canvas, and that's when you're like your snow slough and stuff like that is like the most real and like crazy and stuff like that. So
And
then
it's
it's all a bit
I had
crazy.
too was a question that I had is how often and it might be never, are your lines and like what you ride or what you hit dictated by somebody else? Does that ever happen, or is it usually up to you?
I would say it's a collaborative effort. Like you'll definitely be like, hey, check that out, like, what do you think of that line or whatever, but I would never, it's pretty rare when someone's like, you should go ski that. Well, that's not true. Like, you do say that, but there's no pressure, I guess, would be my point.
If you're like, no, like, that's not gonna work.
And like, and it's like one of like the number one questions that you get is like, where does, like, do you get pressured into skiing these lines? And it's like,
Mhm.
generally speaking, it's the opposite. If you're like stepping up to like a big gnarly line, the filmmakers and the photographers are generally trying to talk you out of it. They're like, are you sure? Like, because like that most of, like, I mean, most of the people I work with are like super experienced, and they've seen what happens when it goes wrong, and so they have to deal with it a
Mhm.
lot of the time. So it's like they're not looking for that,
No.
and I really respect that. And it's good. I think it's good to be questioned. I think it's good to like be able to like articulate why you think it's okay to go ski that line.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
And it go
but
into
yeah,
that
but it's
mutual respect too.
yeah, but it's very much like a collaborative effort out there. I mean, like, we're like the crew that I film with now, it's like a smaller crew. We don't have guides out there. We're like very much out there by ourselves. So it's like you're making all the avalanche condition judgments as a crew. You
Mhm.
get into a zone, like, I mean, we're all very Canadian, so it's like, which line do you want? No, you pick first, like that sort of thing. It's not a lot of like, that's mine, stay away from my line or whatever.
Mhm.
um and normally it just kind of works out organically. Like, you come into a zone and someone's like super stoked on something, you're like, perfect, like, I'll look somewhere else. Um and I mean, that's the kind of beauty of it. It's like you can have 4 or 5 skiers there and everyone's going to look at the mountain a little bit differently,
Mhm.
and pick something differently. But you totally like help each other out. You're like, hey, what, like, how do you think that cliff's going to be? Like, how would you ski that? Like, it's collaborative in that sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So I can do some kind of closing off questions here, but I was gonna ask first, is there any trips or projects that you've done that have really stood out the most for you?
um
Like kind of
oh
highlights, if you were to look back at the highlight
I,
reel.
I yeah, I mean, there's been a lot for sure. I uh, I do not know the year. I've never been good with years, but we went to Svalbard in the dead of winter for like a month a bunch of years ago, and it was to shoot a skier in front of an eclipse.
Mhm.
It was
So
like one of
cool.
the yeah, it was like one of the only places, or the only place in the world in recent times that would have the opportunity to see the eclipse um, with snow happening. And so we went on this friggin' crazy expedition, and we were like fairly new to expeditions at that time, but it had all these different elements of craziness. And you're like on polar bear watch, so you had to wake up in the middle of the night and get out of your sleeping bag in a tent and go and like watch for polar bears. It was like kind of crazy, but yeah, I mean, it would be hard to top that trip. And then, I mean, we traveled to like the most northern town in the world in the middle of, like, it was the end of their winter, which is generally not when you went there. Like, took snowmobiles, like snowmobiled in this camp, and then it could have just been cloudy that day, and we would
Yeah.
have totally not seen the eclipse. And somehow it all lined up and we saw the eclipse and we got the shot, and it was like full. I mean, you don't ever get that experience.
Mhm.
There's no way. And then so that kind of followed up, the next follow-up trip we did to that, we went to Greenland, and we brought a climate scientist along with us. His name was Alan Hubbard, and the premise of that movie was to like alleviate our carbon guilt, by bringing a climate scientist along. And so we did some research and stuff on the ice cap there, and that was super cool. And that was like, I mean, I knew about climate change. I knew how I felt about climate change, but to that point, I like wasn't vocal about it, and I wasn't doing anything about it. And so the movie was cool, but like it was kind of the after effects of taking that movie on tour, to premieres. And people like really wanted to know like what we were doing for it. And I'm like one of those people that if I'm going to talk about it, I need to start walking the walk. And I think that was in 2016. So what we're like 6 years later, and I've like definitely, that's like really shaped my life for the last 6 years, is trying to like work on my carbon footprint and kind of do better for the world. So that's probably been the most influential in my life for sure. Yeah, and then, like after Guilt Trip, we made a movie that is probably one of my favorite movies called Curve of Time, and that was like the first year after Guilt, or kind of the follow up to Guilt Trip, and Greg Hill and I, it just like kind of shows the process of us changing our paths. And Jordan Manley put it together, and it's like yeah, I'm super proud of that movie. It's like a really cool way to do things, and Greg's a fun person to do stuff like that with, because it's like it's just fun. It's like you don't have to like, we went on this crazy electric road trip to ski these volcanoes in a Nissan Leaf that had a 150 kilometer range, and we drove like 4,000 kilometers in 10 days. Like it was it was not for everybody, but we had a blast. Like it was amazing. It was like a super memorable trip. And then it just kind of like, you're like, okay, like making changes doesn't have to be bad. We look at it with such a negative connotation. So it was like fun to do that, and it definitely like really snowballed from there.
And cool to see what you can do. Kind of even in 2016, that would have been a long time ago. Like technology is very different now, but it would have been really cool as like ambassadors in that way, to show what's possible.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that's like very much I mean, I guess that was like a bit of a turning point in my career of like, I made a name for myself and have a bunch of followers and all those things. And it's like, okay, what do I want to talk about? And that's kind of like the thing that I've latched onto and that I'm passionate about these days. And that's like the beauty of becoming a pro skier or a pro anything, like a public figure of some sort, is like you spend a lot of investment and time of like making a name for yourself. But once you have a name for yourself, then you can kind of start like really deciding how you want to like share that around and do the things that you're passionate about. And that's definitely like where I'm at now for sure.
It's a really interesting marker, because I'm noticing it's a consistent theme amongst people who have reached a level of success, is that at some point you reach a point where you start ideally giving back, or like really becoming a really positive influence in whatever way that you want to, like, and that goes like across the board with like people who are successful in business or finance or sport. At some point, they reach, it's like I see it as like a sign of almost like professional maturity or success maturity, where it's like you have that almost like the freedom to be able to do that, and the platform, as you say.
Yeah, and like also, I mean, I guess like I in my career, I've had the moments where it's like you hold everything so tight. You're like, every little decision, you're like, should I do this or should I do that? I don't know. Like, what did they think I should do? Like, should I do what they think? Like, you're just like overthinking everything. And I feel like there's like almost like a stage in everyone's career where you're just like, all right, screw it. Like, I'm just going to do what I feel is like my best. And if it works out, it works out. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, because I like gave it my best. And to me, every time I like refocus on that, it like everything works. It's like everything like falls into line, and it's like it's very much that. And I feel like I have to remind myself of that every couple of years. It's like you start getting swayed. There's so many people that like want you to do this or want you to do that, and like figuring out that like balance of like being relevant, but also like staying true to your values. Because like ultimately, like when you are feeling good about you and what you're doing, that's when people like want to be a part of it. And you bring that energy to people. I think is like part of it for sure. And like business is no different. Like I mean, you hear like Elon talk, like definitely like someone that I look up to a lot. That guy doesn't care about money. Like he didn't money, like the world's richest man. He like does not care about money. He like wants to do what he wants to do. And that's why he's successful. If he was to look at money, like starting Tesla and stuff like that, it's like, there's no way. Like, I mean, it's still not making money, I'm sure, but it's like that, like to create that change, you just have to go out and do it. And if it works out, it works out. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's okay too. But
yeah, like the money's not the reward for him or the goal.
no, and when I say it doesn't work out, like most of the time it does work out, because if you're like passionate about something, you are going to work your butt off until it does work out. Like, I mean, within reason, obviously, but like, I find that with like most entrepreneurs, it's like, I think it was like Fred from Rumpus, he was talking about like COVID, because they basically like were just starting to like hit their stride, and then COVID hit. And he was like, well, it's like having a baby. You don't just let your baby die. Like you like figure out how to like keep it going. Like, and that's, I mean, that's business entrepreneurship in a nutshell in my mind. So it's like, okay, here's the problem. How do we fix it? What do we do next? Like, you're just always pivoting, which I find super interesting. And I'm definitely like attracted to like that business mindset of like, just like having a problem, but it's not the end. It's just like, how do we work through this? Okay, we can't work through this. What are our next options? Like, it's just like a very like systematic like way of doing it, where you're like always moving forward, I think.
Yeah, and that it's almost like Fred with like, it's like the baby. It's like, well, I can't get rid of my baby.
Yeah.
It's like it's not an option, and it's not like failure is not an option, but giving this up, that's not the option. You know, it's like there'll be a way that that we can push through, but not doing it doesn't come to mind.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're just like, how do you fix this? And yeah, I mean, small business is like definitely not for everybody, and like being a pro skier very much is a small business of sorts. And at the end of the day, when you look at small business and your hourly wage, you probably never actually want to look at that, because it'd just be disheartening. But once you've done it, once you've got into it, there's like that, you're stuck. You're not going back to the other way.
Yeah.
It's more fun and exciting, and yeah, just like, I don't know, gives you that hustle that if it's not going to work, then you don't get to pay the bills, because you're not the only person that you're relying on is you, you know, like, so it's a good motivation, I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, well, I'll do wrap up question is, what is next for you? What's coming up? I guess what's coming up this winter?
There it's a tricky question right now, actually. There's some change going on with me. I'm not quite ready to talk about it. But I guess what's like really inspiring me right now is like a kind of like sustainable ski segment around Revelstoke. I've been pitching it for a long time, but I think it's like time to like make it happen. But yeah, I mean, there's a bit of like element of like wanting to transition out of like the full pro skiing and getting more into like product development stuff. That's a side that's always been super interesting. But ultimately, like, I guess that's like, when I looked at my whole ski career last year and like what I wanted to do with it, it was like very much like I'm not done. I'm like still super passionate about it. And there's a few more things that I'd like really like to do before it all ends. And if it ends, that's fine too. I'll just keep skiing for fun. So it's
Yeah.
like kind of all works out. But yeah, the farm business is definitely taking up a lot of spare time and energy these days. But yeah, we'll see where that goes to.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. It's just been so awesome watching your career, and even just like some of the stuff you talk about, like some of these trips, and you're so good at the marketing side of things. And I don't know if it's because I follow you and I don't follow a ton of other pro skiers, but I feel like you've done such a fantastic job on that, on just like keeping up with content and what you're doing. And it's made it really easy and really enjoyable to like follow your progression over the years. And then watching, like, I know exactly like when, or not exactly, but it was like obvious and palatable when they like more of the like the climate change aspect came in, because you started to see more of these projects and more of it on your social media. And yeah, it's just been cool to watch your career unfold over the years. And then now is yeah, with your kid and with Jesse and with the farm and following you guys too. It's all just so exciting. Like,
Yeah,
it's a
no,
cool journey.
it's yeah, it's great. I mean, that's what life's about, all of it. I mean, it's interesting how wrapped up you get, how worried about it you are when you're younger, and then you start getting older and start looking back and you're like, well, it's like a pretty cool life that we've lived.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, to me, that's like all at the end of the day, that's what I want to, when you look back, be stoked on it. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been like so fortunate. It's like one of those classic things of so many different times in my career. It's just like been at the right place, right time.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, like the um like I guess it would have been like in my 30s there, like it's kind of like the end of where like what would be your like classic end of your like really like throwing down part of your career.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally that's when like ski touring started getting popular, and we like ski toured all the time anyway, so it's like we have to be right there, and none of the companies knew what they were doing, so we were like super well positioned. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I've just had like amazing mentors for both the business side of things and the skiing side of things, and that's like really helped me with my voice and like how I present myself. And yeah, coming from the Rockies like gives you like a really healthy dose of being humble, both towards the mountains and both as a person. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I attribute a lot of my success to that side of things too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, crazy ride. I mean, I would have guessed it 20 years ago. Not even half of it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel really fortunate
Mm-hmm.
about all that.
There's a lot to be said too. Like, it's easy to pull out like where the key like success factors are, of like having the mentorship, exactly as you said, being in the right, even just like being in the Rockies and having that as a place to grow up and be your backyard. And then just even just sticking it out. It's like if you do something and you're committed to it and you're professional and you enjoy it for long enough, then there's a pretty slim chance that you won't make it like you should.
Yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, and like not always having like a defining thing of like what making it is too. It's like
Hmm.
enjoying the ride and just yeah, doing stuff without feeling like you're entitled to get stuff back. Just doing
Hmm.
stuff because it's like what you want to do. I think is like really important. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I mean I mean I would say that's probably one of the hardest things about it is like staying true to yourself. And it that's like a rolling or a sliding scale, it's like sometimes you are like totally selling out and not doing something that you like, and that's okay too. Like it's a job.
Hmm.
There's elements of that, but like trying to like making sure that you're like you still have the passion and love for doing what you do, because that's the worst. I mean, that was like the problem with ski racing that I saw, is like so many of my friends that I grew up ski racing with, they stopped ski racing and then they stopped skiing, and that was like never right to me.
Yeah.
Because I mean, skiing, snowboarding, all of it, being in the outdoors is like such an amazing thing that we have. Like it doesn't matter if you're jumping off of cliffs or like doing a pizza down a groomer. It's like, it's the same thing. And it brings you the same emotions. So it's like, I think it's, the more people that do that, the better, really, and enjoy that.
Yeah. And I like the idea of following what is both like true to you and then what you enjoy as well. And being, because it seems that's also like a common theme, that it's like just sticking with what, it's like your gut almost, and what works for you both on a risk level and who you work with and what you do and the decisions that you make, and even the stuff that that you're vocal about. It's sticking with what is important, what's real for you.
Totally. And none of it happens overnight. I mean, I'm sure you know as well as anyone, you have periods of your life where they're quite chill and there's not a lot going on, and I mean, like, as like starting small businesses, it's like those are the times that I realize now is like the times when you gather energy and inspiration for what's next. Because generally when you start down a path of deciding to do something, a business or an idea, it's like the balance isn't there. You're so busy, you don't know what to do with yourself. So it's definitely like learning to take those times of like down times and enjoying them. And I feel like as you get older, those down times get shorter and shorter, but you get better at recognizing them and being like, okay, I'm going to chill right now because I don't get to chill.
This is the time to chill.
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, but I'm stoked for the kid for that, because he just like makes you chill. You're like, I am not going to be productive now. There is no possible way, and you just have to be okay with that. So
totally. Yeah.
But so far it's super fun. So
yeah. Oh, and there's like, well, we're both just like new into it, so I just know that like seeing other people with kids, especially in Revelstoke and in the mountains and stuff, there's just so much cool stuff. It's a whole nother phase. Like, you've had this epic like 20-year career, and it's like the next 20 years are going to be so crazy too.
Totally. Yeah, totally. No, I'm like so excited to teach him a little bit of what I know, and maybe he'll listen to some of it. Maybe he won't, and that's okay. I mean, he half of them's mine, so I'm sure he'll have a bit of sass to him for sure. So hopefully.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much. To close this off, how can people find and follow you and support you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most active is on Instagram, which is just my name, Chris Rubens, Rubens, on Instagram, and Facebook, and I guess that's about it. And I don't know, just buy Salomon skis and support the sponsors. But no, I mean, I would say more than anything, it's like I guess my two things would be to go out and enjoy the outdoors, and if you can, do something good for the environment, because everybody doing something good goes a long way. So
and also going to hit up the farm stand in the Big Eddy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a whole different element. The farm stand in the Big Eddy, or at the farmers market, or eating at pretty much any of the restaurants in Revelstoke. If you eat a salad there probably are greens.
Amazing. That's awesome. Okay,
awesome.
Chris,
well, thanks for the talk.